In a distant galaxy, on a planet covered in sparkling crystal towers and floating streets, lived a family of highly advanced aliens. They had everything anyone could ever want: shimmering technology, bright skies that changed colors, and creatures that could walk on air. Their lives were busy and filled with luxury, but one thing they owned made them uncomfortable: a strange alien dog named Gribble. Gribble was not like the other pets they had. Most alien creatures were graceful and beautiful, with glowing skin and delicate shapes that fit perfectly in their elegant city. But Gribble was different. He had multiple bulging eyes that looked in every direction, fur that seemed slimy to touch, and claws that clicked against the crystal floors in a strange rhythm. His bark was not soft or pleasant, it was loud and piercing, sometimes so high that it made small devices buzz or glass tremble. The aliens didn't like him. They called him Hideous, saying he was a mistake, a creature that didn't belong in their world. They ignored him most of the time, leaving him to wander the corners of their vast, shiny home. Gribble would sit quietly in dark hallways, his many eyes watching as the aliens moved past him, too busy to notice his presence. When the family was busy with social events, experiments, or travel across the galaxy, Gribble was left alone. He would often curl up in small, forgotten spaces, his claws clicking quietly against walls, and wait for someone to pay attention to him. The other citizens of the city were even less kind. When they saw Gribble walking the streets, they whispered behind their hands. "That creature is cursed," they said. "It should never have been born." Children, who were usually fearless and playful, would dare each other to touch him, running away in terror as soon as he moved. Gribble never chased them. He only watched silently, tilting his head as though he understood their fear but did not resent them for it. Even though he was abandoned and feared, Gribble was not helpless. He learned quickly how to survive. He scavenged the streets for food, sniffing out scraps left by careless citizens or small energy crystals that powered machines. He discovered quiet spaces to rest when the streets were too crowded or dangerous, and slowly he began to understand the city in a way the aliens never did. He could navigate dark tunnels that even the city's maps didn't cover, slip through areas the aliens thought were inaccessible, and find safety in places no one else could imagine. It was during these lonely days that Gribble's intelligence began to show. At first it was small things. He would push buttons on abandoned machines, mimicking the sounds he had heard the aliens make. He learned which doors would open when pressed in a certain way, and how to avoid the security drones that patrolled the streets. He started to anticipate dangers: a falling piece of crystal, a sudden gust of wind that could knock a small alien off a platform, and would move to safety before anyone else noticed. The aliens, busy with their own lives, didn't notice any of this. They continued to see Gribble only as a grotesque nuisance, a reminder of a mistake they had made. They didn't see the way he watched the stars at night or how he seemed to think, almost like he was planning something, though no one could know what. Even when he saved a small creature from being crushed by a floating vehicle, no one gave him credit. They simply shrugged and continued on, thinking of him as nothing more than a disgusting dog that belonged outside, out of their sight. Despite being alone so often, Gribble did not give up hope. In the quiet moments when he rested in a shadowed corner, he would imagine someone noticing him. He would imagine someone offering food or speaking kindly to him. And when he imagined it, a small spark of energy seemed to pulse through his slimy fur, as if the universe itself wanted to reward his patience. Gribble's life was not entirely without companionship, though. Small alien creatures, the ones considered insignificant by the city's elite, sometimes approached him. They were curious, not afraid. They could sense something different about him, a quiet strength beneath his odd appearance. Gribble welcomed their presence, not because he needed them, but because he understood what it meant to be ignored and unwanted. The small creatures would follow him, sometimes bringing scraps of food, sometimes just walking by his side as he explored the city's hidden paths. It was in these moments that Gribble began to develop a subtle, quiet confidence. Then came the nights. In the darkness of the city, when the neon lights dimmed and the hum of machines softened, Gribble would climb to the highest towers. He would watch the stars and the passing spaceships, wondering about life beyond this world. He was curious about the humans and aliens who traveled the galaxies, about the adventures they might have. And he realized in those long nights that maybe his life was not meant to be small. even if the aliens believed it was, and so, even though the family had neglected him and the citizens feared him, Gribble learned to survive, to think, and to watch. He became patient, quietly observing the world around him, waiting for something. He did not know what. Perhaps it was someone who would see him not as a hideous mistake, but as something unique and capable. Perhaps it was a chance to show the galaxy that even the most overlooked beings could have incredible potential. No one could have predicted what would happen next. Gribble's life, once lonely and full of fear, was about to change in a way that would shock the aliens and the galaxy itself. But for now, he continued to wander the crystal streets, unnoticed, ignored, yet quietly preparing himself for the moment when the universe would finally see him. Even in his abandonment, Gribble carried a silent strength. He knew that appearances were deceiving. He knew that he had more to offer than anyone could see, and in the quiet corners of the alien city, the creature who everyone despised began to grow, learning, observing, and becoming something far greater than the aliens could ever imagine. Life on the streets of the Crystal City was not easy for Gribble. Every day brought new challenges and every corner hid danger. Machines floated above, sometimes dropping energy waste that could burn or trap him. Other creatures, larger and more aggressive than him, roamed the alleys looking for food or territory, but Gribble had grown smart. He had learned to sense danger before it arrived and to move with speed and precision that surprised even those who feared him. Despite the city's hustle, most citizens ignored him completely. They saw him only as a grotesque figure, something that should stay out of sight. Gribble had long stopped expecting kindness from the aliens. He didn't beg or whine. Instead, he focused on survival, always moving, always observing. And slowly he began to notice patterns, how the city worked, how the machines operated, and how even the citizens moved in predictable ways. Gribble's intelligence surprised even himself. He started experimenting. He would push buttons on abandoned machines just to see what would happen. Sometimes he succeeded in opening doors that were supposed to be locked. Other times he learned to follow the movement of drones and hovercars, anticipating where they would go. He realized that while the aliens had technology and intelligence, they lacked patience. He had something they did not: time and careful observation. This new understanding of the city gave Gribble a small sense of control. He could now find shelter even in the busiest streets. He learned which areas were safe at night and which spots were dangerous during the day. He began hiding in shadows and climbing walls to avoid detection. Children still screamed when they saw him, but Gribble no longer feared them. He understood. Their fear was not personal. It was instinct, a reaction to what they did not understand. Despite his cleverness, Gribble was lonely. For every small alien creature that dared approach him, there were dozens who ran away. He longed for connection, for someone to see him as more than a hideous pet. He often sat in quiet corners, gazing at the stars that shone over the city, imagining what life might be like somewhere else. Sometimes he would hear stories from passing travelers, humans and aliens who spoke of worlds beyond this one, of adventures, friendships, and possibilities. These stories filled him with hope. One day, while scavenging near the edge of the city, Gribble noticed a small crowd gathered around a glowing device. It was a human researcher, someone who had come from a distant star system. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and their appearance always drew attention. But unlike the aliens, the human did not scream at Gribble or call him hideous. Instead, the human knelt down and extended a hand. Gribble hesitated. He had been rejected so many times that trusting someone new felt impossible. But there was something different about this human, a calmness, a kindness that he had never felt before. Slowly he approached, sniffing the offered hand, unsure whether this was a trick or a true gesture of friendship. To his surprise, the human smiled, softly speaking words that made no sound Gribble could understand, yet somehow felt comforting. From that moment, something shifted in Gribble. He realized that not everyone saw him as a mistake or a monster. Some beings, even from distant worlds, could recognize the value in creatures like him. The human researcher gave him small pieces of food, something more nourishing than the scraps he scavenged, and more importantly, the researcher gave him attention, something that Gribble had not received from his own family or the citizens of the city. As the days passed, Gribble and the human formed a quiet bond. The human did not force Gribble to do anything, did not scold him for being strange, and did not judge him for his appearance. Gribble began to follow the human through the streets, curious about the world beyond the city, and perhaps for the first time he felt a sense of purpose. Gribble's abilities, which had gone unnoticed by the aliens, began to show in small ways. He would alert the human to dangers like falling debris or malfunctioning machines. He learned to mimic sounds that could communicate simple ideas, and when small creatures were in danger, Gribble would instinctively act, guiding them to safety. Slowly, whispers began to spread among the citizens. A strange protector had appeared in the city, though no one yet realized it was the grotesque dog they had ignored for so long. Despite these successes, life was not without its challenges. Some aliens still mocked him, calling him a freak and daring each other to confront him. Gribble did not attack, but he did not flee either. He had grown confident in his abilities and had learned that fear could be as much a weapon as strength. And in the quiet moments he would retreat to hidden corners, resting and observing, always learning, always preparing for whatever came next. Gribble's bond with the human deepened. The researcher began to notice how clever he was, how patient, and how remarkably observant. Gribble could solve small problems that no machine could, and he had a quiet bravery that many of the aliens lacked. The researcher began to believe that Gribble was not just a strange alien dog, but a being with intelligence and potential far beyond what anyone had imagined. It was during this time that Gribble began to dream bigger. He no longer saw himself as merely surviving. He imagined helping others, protecting the vulnerable, and showing the galaxy that even the most neglected creatures could make a difference. He was learning that kindness and recognition could bring out abilities that even he did not know he had. The human researcher provided more than food and care. They gave Gribble attention, understanding, and trust. And slowly, Gribble began to trust himself as well. He realized that his appearance did not define him, nor did the opinions of those who abandoned him. What mattered was his actions, his choices, and the courage to keep moving forward, even when the world had turned its back on him. By the end of these days, Gribble was no longer just a lonely, neglected creature wandering the streets. He was a thinker, a protector, and a student of the city's ways. And while the aliens still ignored him, the galaxy was beginning to take notice. For those who truly looked, they could see a hidden spark in his many eyes, a spark that hinted at courage, intelligence, and a destiny far greater than anyone could predict. Even in the darkest alleys where the city seemed cruelest, Gribble carried hope. The small bond with the human had changed something inside him. He now believed that one day, he could rise above neglect and fear, and perhaps show the entire galaxy that being different was not a weakness but a strength. Gribble continued to explore, learn, and grow, preparing for the day when his life would take a turn he could not yet imagine. And in that quiet, unnoticed journey, he was already becoming something extraordinary. Gribble had started to discover his place in the city, but he had not yet realized how much his life was about to change. The bond with the human researcher had given him confidence, and he began exploring the city with a new sense of purpose. He no longer wandered aimlessly or scavenged only for survival. Instead, he watched and learned, studying how the city worked, how the aliens moved, and how danger often crept quietly around the corners. One afternoon, as Gribble roamed the streets near the crystal towers, he noticed a small group of children playing near a floating energy device. The device was old, sparking occasionally, and no one was paying attention. The children laughed and ran around, unaware of the risk. Gribble felt a surge of instinct. He barked, a sharp, urgent sound, running toward the children. They froze and looked at him, frightened by his grotesque appearance, but then something unexpected happened. Gribble jumped and nudged the children out of the way just as a small spark from the device flew toward them. The children were startled, but safe. They ran to their parents, shouting about the strange protector that had saved them. For the first time, some citizens noticed Gribble, not as a freak, but as a creature capable of action. A few adults watched quietly, curious and cautious, while others whispered behind their hands, unsure what to make of the hideous dog who had acted with such bravery. Gribble did not seek praise. He returned to his quiet corner, panting and observing. But the experience changed him. He realized that his actions could matter, that even one small act of protection could ripple through the city. It was the first time he felt a sense of accomplishment beyond mere survival. Over the next days, Gribble began to practice. He explored areas of the city that were dangerous or overlooked. He learned to read the movement of machines, predicting when and where sparks might fly or when a hovering platform might collapse. Small creatures began to follow him more often, sensing his ability to keep them safe. And slowly, word spread. A mysterious, grotesque dog was quietly protecting the vulnerable in the city. The human researcher noticed these changes too. They began to pay more attention to Gribble's intelligence, observing how he solved problems and acted decisively in moments of danger. The researcher started to bring tools and small devices for Gribble to experiment with, encouraging him to explore his abilities. Gribble learned to manipulate objects, open simple locks, and even mimic some sounds to communicate small ideas. It was as if his intelligence, long ignored, was finally being nurtured. One evening, a storm swept over the city. Not a normal storm, but a dangerous energy surge caused by a malfunctioning tower. Sparks flew, platforms swayed, and the streets became chaotic. Citizens ran for cover, but some were trapped, unable to reach safety. Gribble's senses immediately detected the danger. He darted through the streets, warning those in danger with sharp, urgent barks and guiding smaller creatures to safe areas. His many eyes helped him see every angle, and his quick reflexes allowed him to move faster than most beings could comprehend. By the time the storm settled, Gribble had saved several creatures from injury. Word spread quickly, and for the first time, the city's citizens began to see him differently. No longer just a hideous dog, Gribble was becoming a protector, someone or something that could act where the aliens could not. Some adults still whispered and feared him, but many more began to watch with respect, curious to see what he would do next. Despite this newfound attention, Gribble remained humble. He did not act for recognition. Each action was driven by instinct, empathy, and the quiet understanding that helping others was more important than being seen. And as he roamed the streets at night, observing the city from hidden corners, he began to realize that his life was no longer just about survival. He had a purpose. The bond with the human researcher grew stronger during this time. They were no longer just a source of food and attention, but a companion, someone who celebrated his cleverness and encouraged his growth. Gribble learned to trust fully, responding to gestures and subtle commands, understanding that he was valued and appreciated. It was a new feeling, one that he had never experienced in his life with the alien family that had neglected him. Soon, Gribble's reputation spread beyond the small districts he had explored. Citizens began to share stories of the strange, hideous dog who acted with bravery, intelligence, and care. Some dismissed the tales as exaggerations, while others watched carefully, curious to see if the stories were true. Gribble did not notice the whispers. He was focused on learning, observing, and continuing to act when needed. One quiet night, as he rested on a ledge high above the city, Gribble reflected on everything that had happened. He remembered the neglect, the fear, and the loneliness that had once defined his life. Now he felt a small sense of pride, not arrogance, but pride in having survived, learned, and begun to make a difference. The city, once a place of indifference and fear, was slowly starting to notice him. And for the first time, Gribble allowed himself to imagine something bigger. He imagined exploring the galaxy, helping more beings, and proving that even the most overlooked creatures could rise to greatness. He imagined a life where he was not judged by his appearance, where his intelligence and heart mattered more than how he looked. And he understood something very important. His destiny was not determined by neglect or fear, but by courage, action, and the willingness to trust again. Gribble's nights became training sessions. He practiced moving silently, observing patterns and anticipating dangers. He helped the smallest creatures navigate the dangerous streets and experimented with using tools and devices left by the human researcher. Each small success built his confidence, preparing him for challenges even greater than the minor storms and dangers of the city. By the end of this part of his journey, Gribble was no longer just a neglected, hideous dog wandering the streets. He was an intelligent, brave, and caring being, quietly learning how to act, how to protect, and how to make a difference. The city had begun to notice him, though they did not yet understand the full extent of his potential. And somewhere in his mind, Gribble knew that the moment to show his true abilities was approaching, a moment that would not only change his life, but also shock the entire galaxy. He had learned to survive, to observe and to act with care and intelligence, and now he was ready for what came next. The city had grown quiet that evening. The usual hum of machines softened, and the glow from the crystal towers reflected like 1,000 tiny stars across the streets. Gribble sensed something different in the air. His many eyes scanned the surroundings, noticing small details that others overlooked. A flicker in a floating energy panel, the unusual hum of a nearby machine, and the subtle vibrations in the streets. Something was coming, and Gribble instinctively knew it was not ordinary. Suddenly, a massive energy storm erupted in the city. Sparks flew from the towers and small explosions shook the streets. Machines malfunctioned. Hover platforms wobbled dangerously, and citizens ran screaming for safety. Panic spread quickly. The storm moved unpredictably, targeting the lower districts where most of the population lived. Some citizens were trapped on high platforms, unable to descend safely. Others were caught near faulty machines that could explode at any moment. Gribble's instincts took over immediately. He did not pause to think about the danger to himself. Instead, he ran into the heart of the chaos, barking loudly, using the sharpness of his voice to alert those nearby. His multiple eyes helped him track the movement of falling debris and sparks, and his agile body allowed him to navigate the crumbling streets with ease. He moved faster than anyone else, reaching creatures in danger before it was too late. Small creatures and citizens alike began noticing him in action. At first, they were terrified by his hideous appearance and piercing bark, but as Gribble guided them to safety, they realized he was trying to help. With each rescue, their fear slowly turned into awe. People whispered in disbelief. The neglected, grotesque dog had become a hero. Gribble saved the first group of small creatures trapped near a broken energy device. He nudged them toward a safe passage, his body shielding them from sparks. Then he turned to a platform teetering dangerously above the ground, helping a family of aliens climb down safely. His movements were precise, his timing perfect. Every life he saved strengthened his resolve, and every grateful gaze he received reinforced the truth he had learned. His actions mattered, and appearances did not define worth. Meanwhile, the human researcher watched from a safe distance, amazed at Gribble's bravery and intelligence. They had seen his cleverness and loyalty before, but nothing compared to this. Gribble was not just acting on instinct. He was making decisions, predicting dangers, and saving lives in ways even the most skilled aliens could not. The researcher realized that Gribble's true potential was far greater than anyone had imagined. The storm continued to rage, and chaos spread throughout the city. Machines exploded and streets became almost impassable. But Gribble did not stop. He darted between falling debris, pulled creatures out of harm's way, and even guided groups to emergency shelters that had been overlooked. He had become a beacon of hope in a city that was filled with fear. For the first time, the aliens who had neglected and mocked him were forced to watch and understand the creature they had dismissed. Their initial shock turned to disbelief as they realized that this grotesque abandoned dog was saving lives while they had done nothing. The city that had laughed at him now witnessed his courage, intelligence, and heart in action. Gribble's actions did not stop with saving individual creatures. He began noticing patterns in the storm itself. The energy surge followed certain paths, creating dangerous zones. Gribble used his understanding of these patterns to lead larger groups to safety, avoiding areas that were about to collapse or explode. His many eyes and sharp senses gave him a clear advantage, and he moved with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. As the night wore on, Gribble's heroic acts continued. By the time the storm began to subside, dozens of lives had been saved. Small creatures, citizens, and even some skeptical aliens had witnessed the dog's bravery. They whispered stories of his actions, spreading the word through the city. The grotesque dog who had once been ignored had become a legend overnight. Gribble, however, did not seek recognition. Once the danger had passed, he quietly moved to a shadowed corner, catching his breath and observing the aftermath. The city was damaged, but most of its inhabitants were safe. The creatures he had saved were recovering, and the citizens began to speak of gratitude and admiration. Yet Gribble remained humble. He understood that bravery was not about fame. It was about doing what was right when no one else could. The human researcher approached him, offering food and a gentle touch. Gribble accepted, but his attention remained alert, scanning the streets for any remaining danger. The bond between them had deepened through this crisis. The researcher admired Gribble's courage, intelligence, and selflessness, while Gribble respected the human for their trust and companionship. Together, they had faced a challenge that would have overwhelmed most beings in the city. The storm's aftermath left the city in awe of Gribble. Citizens who had once feared or ignored him now saw him differently. Some approached cautiously, offering small tokens of appreciation or simple gestures of respect. Gribble accepted these quietly, his focus always on observing and protecting. He had proven that even a neglected, grotesque dog could act with intelligence, bravery, and heart. That night, as the city slowly recovered and the stars returned to the sky, Gribble rested on a high ledge overlooking the streets below. The memory of the storm and the lives he had saved filled him with a quiet satisfaction. He understood something important. No matter how much the world had neglected him, he had the power to make a difference. His actions mattered, and his heart had the capacity to impact the lives of others. For the first time in his life, Gribble felt a sense of belonging. He was no longer just a grotesque, abandoned creature wandering the streets. He was a protector, a hero, and a being of value. The city had witnessed his courage, the human researcher had acknowledged his intelligence, and even those who had once mocked him were starting to understand his worth. Gribble knew that this was only the beginning. The storm had revealed his potential, but he also understood that there would be more challenges ahead. He was ready for them. Each experience, each act of bravery, and each moment of observation had prepared him for what was to come. He had learned that being different was not a weakness, and that even the most neglected beings could rise to greatness when they acted with courage and heart. As he settled into the quiet of the night, Gribble felt a new sense of purpose. He would continue to protect, observe, and grow, showing the galaxy that appearances were not the measure of value. And while the city slept, unaware of the full extent of his abilities, Gribble knew that he was ready for the next challenge, something that would not only define his destiny, but also shock the entire galaxy. After the storm had passed, the city slowly began to return to its usual rhythm. Hovering machines buzzed softly again, and the crystal towers reflected the morning light like millions of tiny suns. But the story of the grotesque dog who had saved so many lives spread quickly. Citizens who had once ignored or mocked Gribble now spoke of him in hushed, awed tones. Some brought small gifts, scraps of energy food or trinkets, as a way to thank the dog who had acted with bravery when no one else could. Gribble noticed the changes but remained humble. He did not perform his acts for recognition or reward. Each step he took, each creature he guided to safety, was done with instinct and care. Yet he could feel the shift in the city. People's eyes followed him as he passed. Small creatures looked up to him with trust, and the human researcher, his loyal companion, watched him with pride and admiration. But not everyone was happy. The aliens who had neglected him, the ones who had once called him hideous and unwanted, began to feel a mix of shame and jealousy. They saw how the citizens now regarded Gribble with respect and even reverence. The idea that a creature they had dismissed and ignored could rise above them filled them with anger. Some whispered among themselves, plotting to reclaim him, not for gratitude or admiration, but to regain a sense of control and pride. They approached Gribble cautiously, attempting to lure him back with words and gestures that once would have worked when he was dependent on them. But Gribble, having experienced kindness and trust from the human researcher, did not respond the way they expected. He had learned loyalty, and he had learned discernment. He could sense their intentions, not out of malice, but from the lessons he had gained surviving neglect and danger. The human researcher noticed the alien family's attempts and quietly observed, understanding that Gribble's bond with them was no longer a matter of obedience, but of choice. One day, the aliens tried again. They arrived with gifts, devices, and promises, hoping to tempt Gribble into returning to their side. Citizens watched nervously, unsure if the dog would respond, but Gribble stayed calm, his many eyes observing every movement, analyzing every word and gesture. He approached the humans he trusted, seeking comfort and reassurance. Then, with a quiet but firm gesture, he made it clear. His loyalty was no longer with those who had neglected him. His trust belonged to those who had cared for him when no one else had. the human researcher and the small creatures of the city who relied on him. The aliens were shocked. They had expected fear, dependence, or immediate obedience. Instead, they found a dog who had learned the value of trust, respect, and loyalty. They realized that neglecting someone capable of courage and intelligence could have consequences far beyond what they had imagined. Gribble did not attack them, nor did he run away in fear. He simply chose not to follow. In that simple act, he showed more strength than most of them had ever known. Meanwhile, the citizens' respect for Gribble continued to grow. Stories spread of how he had saved lives during the storm, how he had guided the lost and the frightened, and how he had faced danger without hesitation. Children who had once been afraid of his grotesque appearance now looked to him with admiration. Small creatures followed him eagerly, trusting him to lead them safely through the city's hidden dangers. Even some adults who had doubted him before now watched with cautious respect, learning that actions mattered more than appearances. Gribble's intelligence became even more apparent during this time. He began to solve small problems for the citizens, from guiding lost creatures to repairing minor damages in the city using simple tools. He learned to open energy panels safely, move small obstacles, and alert citizens to potential dangers before they occurred. Every action, no matter how small, reinforced the idea that he was more than a neglected pet. He was a being capable of thought, care, and heroism. The human researcher continued to nurture Gribble's abilities. They brought new tools, devices, and learning opportunities. Gribble experimented with these items, learning how to use them creatively to help others. He discovered that his intelligence and adaptability could make him a leader of sorts, guiding creatures and citizens alike during moments of danger. Slowly, he became the city's quiet guardian, always present but never demanding attention. Despite all the admiration, Gribble remained humble. He did not chase fame or recognition. He acted because it was the right thing to do, because he had experienced neglect and wanted to prevent others from facing the same fear and loneliness he once endured. He understood empathy in a way few beings did. Every act of protection, every small rescue was done with care, patience, and intelligence. The aliens who had abandoned him finally began to understand the consequences of their neglect. They had assumed that fear and appearances defined worth. Gribble had shown them otherwise. Their attempts to reclaim him had failed not through force, but because he had learned the value of choice, trust, and loyalty. They were forced to witness a simple truth. Respect and kindness could inspire greatness, while neglect and fear could only lead to loss. Gribble continued to roam the city, guiding small creatures, observing potential dangers, and acting whenever necessary. His legend grew, spreading beyond the streets he protected. Citizens from neighboring districts came to see the courageous dog, curious to witness the intelligence and bravery that had saved so many lives. Stories of his deeds reached other planets, and even distant travelers spoke of the strange, grotesque dog who had become a symbol of loyalty, courage, and heart. Through it all, Gribble remained the same at his core, humble, observant, and compassionate. He had learned from neglect, danger, and kindness alike. He had learned to trust, to act decisively, and to value life above appearances. And in doing so, he had become something far greater than a mere pet. He had become a hero, a protector, and a symbol of what it meant to rise above hardship and be defined not by how the world saw you, but by the choices you made and the lives you touched. By the end of this chapter of his life, Gribble had proven an important lesson to everyone around him. The aliens who had abandoned him had lost their chance to claim his loyalty. The citizens who once feared him now admired him. The small creatures who had once followed him for protection now respected and trusted him. And through it all, Gribble remained humble, quietly continuing his work, knowing that true greatness came from action, empathy, and courage. He had faced neglect, danger, and the judgments of those who did not understand him. And through it all, he had chosen to act with intelligence, loyalty, and heart. The galaxy had begun to take notice, and Gribble's story was far from over. His journey had only just begun, and the adventures, challenges, and lessons yet to come would only cement his place as one of the most remarkable beings in the galaxy. After the city recovered from the storm and the chaos of recent events, life slowly returned to a quieter rhythm. But Gribble was no longer the same creature who had once wandered the streets neglected and ignored. The grotesque dog who had once been abandoned had become something extraordinary. Citizens of the city now looked at him not with fear but with admiration and respect. Children pointed him out in excitement, and small creatures followed him wherever he went. Even the aliens who had once rejected him could not deny the courage, intelligence, and loyalty that radiated from his every action. Gribble's days were filled with a mix of adventure, learning, and protection. He continued to explore the city, observing patterns, predicting dangers, and helping those in need. He had developed a quiet routine, watching over the citizens and the small creatures that depended on him, always ready to act in an instant. The human researcher remained his constant companion, providing guidance, care, and companionship. Together, they formed a bond built on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. A bond that had grown stronger through every trial, every danger, and every act of heroism. The city itself had begun to change because of him. Citizens who had once been fearful or indifferent now spoke to small creatures with kindness, understanding that even the smallest life mattered. Stories of Gribble's deeds spread throughout the districts, inspiring hope and courage in the hearts of those who had once doubted themselves. He had become a symbol not just of bravery, but of the power of empathy, patience, and loyalty. One day, word of Gribble's heroism reached neighboring planets. Travelers and explorers spoke of a grotesque dog who had saved countless lives during a storm that threatened an entire city. Some came to see him in person, curious to witness the intelligence and bravery that had amazed so many. Gribble, however, did not seek attention. He remained humble, quietly observing, ready to act when needed, and continuing his work as a protector and guardian. Despite his fame spreading far beyond the city, Gribble's focus never wavered. He continued to help creatures and citizens alike, solving problems no one else could. When a small hover platform malfunctioned, he found a way to steady it. When young creatures became lost in the twisting streets, he guided them safely home. Even in small acts, he showed the lessons he had learned from his life of neglect and the kindness he had received from the human researcher. Each action, no matter how minor, reinforced the truth that courage, intelligence, and empathy mattered more than appearances. The aliens who had once abandoned him were forced to witness his growing reputation. They could see how he inspired others, how he solved problems, and how he had become a central figure in the city's safety and well-being. Their attempts to reclaim him had failed, not through force, but because Gribble had chosen loyalty, trust, and compassion over fear and obedience. They had learned an important lesson. Neglect and judgment could never define the worth of a being. Only actions, heart, and courage could. Gribble's heroism eventually became legendary. Stories of his deeds were told across galaxies, inspiring other beings to act with bravery and kindness. The small creatures he had saved grew up to tell their own tales of the strange dog who had looked grotesque, but had a heart larger than anyone could imagine. Children who had once been afraid now drew pictures of him, depicting him as a protector, a hero, and a friend. His presence brought hope wherever he went. Despite all of this, Gribble remained humble. He did not act for praise or recognition. Every action was driven by instinct, empathy, and understanding. He remembered the days of neglect, the hunger, and the loneliness. He understood what it meant to be ignored and feared, and it was that memory that gave him purpose. He acted to protect others, to guide them safely, and to show the galaxy that being different was not a weakness, but a strength. The human researcher continued to support him, exploring new worlds and adventures together. Gribble's life, once filled with loneliness and fear, had transformed into a journey of growth, courage, and connection. He had learned to trust, to act, and to lead by example. He had proven that even the most overlooked creatures could rise to greatness when given respect, care, and the chance to show their true potential. As time passed, Gribble's story became a symbol for the entire galaxy. The grotesque dog who had once been neglected was now remembered not for his appearance but for his actions, his loyalty, and his heart. He had shown beings across worlds that judgment based on looks was meaningless and that courage, empathy, and intelligence could make a difference in ways no one could predict. In the quiet moments, Gribble would often sit on high ledges overlooking the city, his many eyes reflecting the glow of the crystal towers. He thought of the journey he had taken, from neglect to recognition, from fear to respect. He understood that his life had changed not because of power or strength, but because of patience, kindness, and the bonds he had formed. Every act of care, every rescue, and every moment of observation had shaped him into the hero he had become. Gribble's legacy was complete. The city had been saved, the citizens inspired, and creatures across the galaxy had learned the true value of courage and heart. The aliens who had once abandoned him had learned humility. The human researcher had found a loyal, intelligent companion. And Gribble, the once neglected, grotesque dog, had finally found a place where he belonged, a place where he could be seen, understood, and celebrated for what truly mattered: his actions, his loyalty, and his heart. Even as new challenges awaited in the galaxy, Gribble was ready. He had proven that appearances did not define a being. He had shown that courage, intelligence, and empathy could change lives. And as he looked at the stars above, he knew that his journey was far from over. New adventures, new lives to protect, and new challenges awaited. But now he faced them not as a neglected dog, but as a hero of the galaxy, a symbol of hope, and a reminder that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. Gribble had risen from neglect to become a legend, a protector and a friend to all who needed him. His story would be told for generations, inspiring countless beings across galaxies. And through it all, he remained humble, loyal, and true to the values that had defined his journey. He had found his place in the universe, and the galaxy would never forget the grotesque dog who had shown them the power of courage, heart, and loyalty.